Hey everybody, Paul Gray here welcoming you to Grace with Paul Gray. We've been talking about new paradigms or a new paradigm about how we see God, how we view God as opposed to how we may have been taught before. We're learning to see God as only good, as loving, as fun to be with. God not only loves you, but He likes you and He likes being with you. And today I want to talk about the fact, and I hope you'll learn to remember, that Jesus speaks grace. When Jesus speaks, He only speaks grace. It may not seem like it when you look at some things that He taught while He was still teaching under the law and raising the bar so that it would be high enough that people would know that it's absolutely impossible to do that. Some of that teaching, I believe, was like tongue-in-cheek when He talked about the log in your eye or plucking out your eye or cutting off your hands or things like that. I mean, I don't think people took Him literally with that. I think it was tongue-in-cheek, and He was saying those things to make a point. One time, Jesus was teaching early on in His ministry, and there were a bunch of stuffy religious leaders there, and there were a lot of people who hadn't heard Jesus or heard of Him before, and they were skeptical but interested. And at the end of that time, in Luke 4:22, Luke says this, "All the people spoke well of Jesus and were amazed of the words of grace that He spoke. And they asked, 'Isn't this Joseph's son?' They were amazed at the words of grace He spoke." Now, what's the deal with, "Isn't this Joseph's son?" Well, Joseph was a carpenter. Jesus was a carpenter. Have you ever been around carpenters when they're like building a house or something? The words are not always words of grace. Sometimes there are, but and that's not an indictment or anything. It's just like carpenters, like a lot of other people, have words that they use on the job that they wouldn't necessarily use in other places. But they were amazed at Jesus' words of grace. One time in my life, I was working really hard for God. I was a pastor, and I had a project that was just consuming me, and I couldn't see how it was going to work, and I was worried about it, and I was spending all this time. Finally, I just stopped and said, "Jesus, what's up with this?" And He said, "I never asked you to do this in the first place." And He said it, like that. I mean, it was funny. He could have said it, "I never asked you to do that in the first place." And we could read things that Jesus says like that, but that's not the way He said it. He said, "I never asked you to do that in the first place." He wasn't harsh. He wasn't condemning. He wasn't shaming me. He wasn't heaping guilt on me. He just said, "No, I didn't ask you to do that to begin with." He spoke words of grace. If you hear condemnation in your mind, you're hearing a different spirit than Jesus, because Jesus only speaks grace. One time, Jesus and the disciples were out. They were on a little trip, and they had to go through a place in Samaria. The Samaritans didn't like the Jews and vice versa. And He sent the guys ahead to make arrangements for food and lodging and stuff. And they came back and said, "These people don't want us there. They don't like you." And they said, the sons of thunder, James and John, this is why they're called the sons of thunder, said, "Hey, boss, should we call down fire from heaven and just toast them?" And they probably were thinking back to what the Old Testament, the Jewish scripture, says about Sodom and Gomorrah. And Jesus says, "Guys, you don't know what spirit you're listening to. If you hear somebody wanting to toast your enemies and burn up a town like that because you didn't like something they did, that's not me. I came to seek and save those who are lost. I'm not harsh like that. My words are not like that. My actions are not like that. I'm all about unconditional love and grace." Jesus speaks grace. So I encourage you, as you listen to Him, listen for His voice, listen for the voice of grace. As you read Scripture, learn to read it through Jesus' eyes after the cross, the finished work of the cross, the forgiveness of everyone, the inclusion of everyone. Learn to read things through Jesus' eyes and hear them through his voice of grace. Hey, hope that's helpful. See you all next time.